Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for the invitation to join you here today. I'm particularly pleased to have the opportunity to follow through on what Bill has just introduced from an American perspective, and particularly to try to give you a different angle, but a pan-European angle, I think picking up two themes that he has developed. One is, how is public policy catching up in respect of the development of the urban environment? And two, what does it mean in the European circumstances of today when we seek to address the question of saying taxpayer capacity, public budgets are constrained? How are we addressing this? Now, I need some help as to how to work this program. Sure. Just press there. Okay. Thank you very much. One of the, I think, particularly important messages to put across is that, first and foremost, you realize, I think very clearly, that the term of sustainable urban smart city development has become a very widely applied brand, perhaps excessively so. And over a period of time, there have been very valuable initiatives in starting individual programs. That, I think, is what has brought you all here today. I think the significant point is, how are we going to lift the scale of this investment, and what exactly authorities, both at European, at national, at regional, at municipal level, are going to do to actually concretely implement the joint visions that they have put together. I'm taking perhaps an agenda that is work in progress. I'm taking what has been set out at community level as community budget aspirations and as proposals to develop a whole series of instruments focused on integrated territorial investment over the period to 2020. Some of these numbers are particularly big, and I think the answer is, again, referring to the type of background that you all know prevails in Europe as well as in other parts of the world, the challenges are big. So the reason we have what seem to be considerable resources committed to these areas is because there is a recognition of the scale of the challenge, and a challenge that runs right across the Europe of 27 member states. It is not unique to either the newer member states, the older member states, or others. It is a common challenge to all. The focus, as you know, on the so-called Europe 2020 strategy is very much on smart growth, on sustainable growth, and on inclusive growth. I think this picks up very much the type of themes that we have heard from Bill in the US context, but it really puts them, I think, in the European situation for us. We have already seen significant coming together of political bodies to agree to back this particular proposal. You all know there is still a further negotiation to come, which will finalize budgets, but this is the normal part of a democratic process in deciding where our priorities lie. But it is very clear that, based on experience to date, there is a very considerable willingness to commit substantial public resources, both at community and at national level in these areas. I think the point to bring forward to you that shows the degree of radicalism that is developing, the degree of novelty and innovation that is developing, is the focus that is now being put on the use of financial instruments as a means both of empowering regional and municipal authorities, as well as indeed improving the leverage and the flexibility of the public resources that are being committed. This is a type of language that perhaps is difficult to get your minds around initially, because we have a very established model of providing grant finance from central sources, whether at national or at community level. We have drawn the conclusions from previous experience that we need to make change for two reasons. One, we can get better results if we actually use financial instruments. We can also empower the local authorities to take their own decisions, which is an essential part of what this whole process is about. And secondly, we can improve the overall results attainable at aggregate level, at national and community level, through using such types of financial resources. So what I will do is walk you through not only the concepts, but perhaps also the first results that have come through, and show you to some degree how institutions such as the European Investment Bank, but also national authorities and national banks can play a role in helping to deliver this particular concept of smart cities. One of the key concepts that is coming forward at community level is an absolute recognition that integrated territorial investment is something that should be prioritized. Therefore, the resources that will be made available through regional funds, structural funds, and other social funds will have a clear dedication to urban authorities and to municipal authorities. They are to be given the means to manage these resources in order to achieve, I think, what are, broadly speaking, coherent and well-endorsed policy proposals at different levels. Speaking from the viewpoint of European Investment Bank, this is obviously one of the substantial financial arms of the Union. In prior years at European level, we have been lending something of the order of 60 billion euro, which is equivalent to the total budgetary resources that are spent by the community in any one year. In countries such as Portugal, we have very substantial involvement, both in economic but also in social and urban development. These are things that, if you like, are basic to the DNA of the institution. So we're focusing on two or three key points. We're focusing, first of all, to provide instruments that enable member states to increase their overall levels of investment in priority areas. I think many of you are conscious that certain member states actually find it difficult to utilize the budgetary funds already available to them. Now that in its own way is both a surprise and it's a dilemma. We would not expect that to happen, but we will specifically and are specifically addressing this question. I think the second point that we're seeking to address, and it is a way out of the classical dilemma of saying it is either budgetary funds or it is private funds. Which is it? We are seeking to build on a successful track record of leveraging external finance in combination with public sector budgetary resources. We're bringing the two together because it is essentially a public-private issue. It is where there are public policy interests involved, but there are clearly issues where the private sector both wishes to contribute, in many cases may wish to control, but in all cases benefits from the actions of the public authorities in this domain. There is a very significant focus on the development of partnerships. The concept of public is already well known throughout the Union. It is particularly well known in Portugal. This is something where we see that there is considerable potential to go further. We see that there are lessons to be learned from what has been done in the past, and there are corrections to be made. But on balance, as we look across the Union, the notion of pursuing public policy goals through public-private partnerships is something that seems to us to be coherent and basically relatively straightforward. But it is not an easy task technically. It has to be managed and managed well if to be successful. I think there is another concept which is particularly important. The degree of know-how at different levels within the community varies considerably. Not all member states feel equally comfortable or equally adept at the implementation of European policy objectives, nor indeed national policy objectives. Therefore, one of the very practical and important things to do is to share the technical and financial expertise that exists both at national level and at European level, and to develop the organizational capability that exists at national level to help the implementation of these programs. In a very practical way, when we look at what has been achieved, we can say the results are surprising. There is such a scattered diagram of results across the Union. We clearly, looking at it with that pan-European viewpoint, wish to take forward this debate and lift the overall level of implementation, because it is results on the ground that matter, to ensure that in fact these policy objectives can be met. The type of things that institutions like EIB or the European Commission or others will pursue are things that are absolutely intrinsic to the smart city agenda, whether it is on growth, employment, on the knowledge economy, whether it is on energy efficiency, whether it is on the development of the type of communication strategy that will be required both for a competitive economy as well as for the type of real efficiencies that in fact Bill was seeking to identify in the US model. It is quite clear that we have at this stage a pretty well-established policy framework, both at national and I think at community level, to reinforce the smart city agenda. We're focusing very much, I think, on urban transformation. One of the big parts of it has clearly been the urban transport agenda. Some 60%, I believe, of all of the funding that we have made available under urban investment has actually gone into the type of urban tramways, of community, of changing modes of transport, of making, in fact, cities much more accessible, and indeed reducing car usage. I think many of the challenges that indeed have already been identified. We really do have problems about developing the overall competitiveness of our economies, and when we talk of our economies, we mean also of our cities, because this is where the vast majority of our people both live and must live. We have seen some very effective examples of where states or cities have taken forward their knowledge economy agenda. The important thing is to help roll out those type of experiences so that what may be seen as a norm in the Scandinavian countries will equally become common practice in other countries, whether in the south, the east, or the center of Europe. Likewise, we are seeing radical changes in the ICT agenda. We need different forms of decision makers. We need to bring together different players, whether at the corporate level, the national level, or the international level. The important message to bring to you is that there are successful trends developing throughout the community. It is important to share the knowledge of those. We focus very clearly when we look on the greenhouse agenda of emissions control, of energy efficiency, of renewables. Cities are major economic players in all of these areas. They are both the people who are seeking the results, they are also the partners who can help us deliver these results. So again, we have, I think, very much a common agenda. So the approach that the European institutions are seeking to take is one of establishing a policy framework that commands common consensus. I think, and I would suggest to you, that significant steps have been taken in that area. We now have to work, on implementing what has been done, on refining it, and on improving it. Nobody should for a moment suggest that what has been done to date is adequate. We have to build on what we have achieved. The second point is to put financial instruments into play in more intelligent ways than have been done in the past, to increase financial leverage, to work in partnership with others, to make private sector investors, whether at institutional level, bank level, corporate level, or otherwise, partners in this process, to provide expertise, because this is what is the glue that brings it all together. Now that, in its own way, perhaps is an interesting and indeed a challenging statement of policy and objectives at European level. In order to give you that confidence that these are things that you can work with, what I'd like to do for a moment is to turn to a certain number of programs that have been developed over the last 5 years or so, which are now at a scale across Europe that simply command attention and review. One has to look at these and say, are they delivering the results? Are those results adequate? How do we improve these programs? And one of the first, I think, programs I would bring to your attention is one that is well established in Portugal. It is well established, I think, throughout all of the cohesion countries, is the Jessica program. Here one has established, in partnership with the managing authorities in each country, with the regional authorities, holding funds, the purpose of which is to invest in urban regeneration and in urban transport. So there are specific urban development funds. These are in part funded from the structural funds, and they are in part funded, which is a key objective, from the private sector itself. I think a second model which we will look at is the whole concept of developing public-private partnerships. Again, this is something that has been taken up particularly actively by the member states. We now have established a model for sharing. When I say a model, that sounds slightly abstract. We have established a working organization for the sharing of expertise and for learning both from each other's successes and failures. I think the third example which I would offer to you is what is known as the ELENA program, which again is providing technical and assistance to municipal authorities in a way which makes this type of program much more achievable and these type of objectives much more achievable than they have been in the past. To put some numbers on this, the level of investment that has gone into the Jessica holding funds is something of the order of 1.7 billion euro of equity in the last 3 to 4 years. We expect to see leverage of a factor of 2 to 4 times that through other investment. This is putting this decision-making power in the hands of local authorities who manage and who own these funds. So we have created a very considerable new instrument, the results of which I think are now becoming through. A second example has been the JASPERS program, the purpose of which is to support public authorities in developing projects both urban and otherwise. In recent times, something of the order of 400 projects have been reviewed, supported, submitted for public funding. This has served to accelerate considerably both decision-making as well as the quality of results in terms of approvals for funding for these type of projects. In terms of the PPP program, if we look at what has been achieved in public sector investment in the year 2011, which in itself was, by European standards, a difficult year, we're looking at investments of the order of 18 billion euro within the Union on over 80 projects. Again, the core question and the core issue is we have created programs that seem to be capable of operating at a European scale, that seem to be addressing our key priority objectives, and which, subject to how we take them forward, can be scaled up in the future. A similar, I think, comment can be made in respect of the ELENA program. Here we have what seems to be a relatively small technical assistance facility of the order of 15 million euro per annum, and yet which has contributed considerably to the development of a large number of projects at municipal level. There are some significant examples. As these PowerPoint slides will be available to you, I'm not going to take you through the detail of this, but I do want to put across to you some of the key points. Here in the question of the London Green Fund, we have a number, if you like, of the natural players. We have the London Development Agency, the London Waste and Recycling Board, and we have public funding from ERDF, from the Commission, who agreed together to establish a fund of the order of 100 million euro. That fund is owned by the managing authority. EIB provides the financial advice on the management of the fund and on the investment decisions to be taken. That fund itself has been the source of capital for two other funds. One which is focused on energy efficiency, which is effectively a debt fund, which is seen to be low risk, which is capable of attracting private finance from the commercial banking sector, and which has supported a particular range of urban development energy efficiency projects. On the other hand, there has been a second fund, an urban waste fund, which has taken forward the challenges of investing in new urban waste projects, both high technology as well as a diverse range of other issues. Here, the investment model is very much an equity model. Again, there is private sector funding coming in to support it. There is advice. So what we are looking at is a model that does two things. It is a model that empowers the local authorities to do things that they could not otherwise do by using a small share of their own budget, supported by public funds at European level, and supported both through managerial systems and otherwise by funds from the private sector. This is, I think, a significant new model. It is one that can be looked at, I think, with interest by many other authorities to see whether the lessons that apply in some of the larger cities in Europe can equally be applied elsewhere. There is more detail available in the PowerPoint presentation on all of these mechanisms, but let me perhaps take another example, which is the province of Milan, where we had issues for the individual municipalities, which effectively saw that they had a number of problems. They saw that they were dealing with a housing stock and a public building stock that was old, was energy inefficient. They did not have, if you like, the scale to handle it, nor did they have the budget to handle it, nor did they have the managerial resources. What one has done is to develop what is referred to as energy performance contracts, or ESCO contracts, depending on the country one is in, of actually helping the municipalities to work together as a group, in fact, to bundle their projects together, to create an intermediary body that carries the risk of implementing these projects and who is remunerated by the energy savings achieved. These type of things are clearly, to many of you, self-evident good sense. You would have thought, surely this could be done, has been done more widely than has been achieved to date. The reality is that, yes, these things are possible, but they have not been achieved to the extent that one would have imagined. So I think many of the messages we're seeking to send out in this area is to say that many things are possible. It is simply necessary to apply oneself consistently and to give oneself the financial and organizational means to achieve them. There are good examples available. Now, this, I think, gives you an overview of what I call work in progress. There is a real sense, I think, at the European level that the urban agenda matters, the territorial agenda matters, that this is where economic activity is concentrated, and this is where competitiveness can be addressed. By doing so, by working absolutely in partnership with the municipal authorities, one can progress in this particular way. We should not be complacent about this agenda. We recognize that we have, both at national and at European level, a track record that is respectable, useful, but we need to go much further than we have gone. I hope, therefore, that this framework, this vista of work in progress, will indeed enlighten some of the discussions later today. Thank you very much.